What's up guys and welcome back to Moan Inc. If you guys are new here, then what's up? My name's Erica. Hey guys, how you doing? For today's video, I'm going to be giving you a context video about none other than the playwright Aeschylus. So Aeschylus is a very, very famous tragedian from the ancient world, and I am, hopefully by the time you watch this, my whole series will be uploaded because I am currently doing a series about Aeschylus's plays and diving into the action and summarizing those for you guys because I want to be as helpful as possible. So this video is just going to be context about who he is, what those plays are about, what those plays are based on if we know, or any sort of surrounding information that I have that I just couldn't figure out a way of including into those individual episodes. So with all that being said, please do not forget to hit the subscribe button and the bell icon so that you know every single time I post in the future. And now let's get into the video. So, Aeschylus! Aeschylus is actually pronounced one of two ways. So it's either Aeschylus the way that I'm saying it, or it's Aeschylus. Whichever way you decide to say it is completely fine. Okay, this is how you spell it, and as long as you know how to spell it, pronunciation, everybody knows what you mean, regardless of Aeschylus. But who is he? Who is Aeschylus? Unlike Homer and Virgil, we know a little bit more about Aeschylus than we do about Homer, but we know a lot less about Aeschylus than we do about Virgil, who's the author of the Aeneid. Homer's the author of the Iliad and the Odyssey. And Aeschylus kind of sits somewhere in the middle. Even though we don't have a lot of certain detail about Aeschylus's life, a lot of his life is probable. I will explain that as we go along. Aeschylus was probably born around 525-ish BC, and he died around 456 BC, if I'm remembering correctly. And we think he's probably from Eleusis. This is due to some family members. This is due to like looking at sort of what other people have said about him. He's probably from Eleusis, but we know that he died in Sicily. So despite being from Eleusis, moving to Athens, ending up being this incredible playwright, he then dies in Sicily, very much a man of the world. Now when it comes to Aeschylus as a person, his character, all of that sort of stuff, the only thing that we can assume with any kind of certainty, you can say assume and certainty in the same sentence, that sounds very, very silly, but we can assume with some level of certainty, with most certainty, that Aeschylus was a soldier during the Persian Wars. Now why do we think that? Well, he was alive during the years of the Persian War, and it was customary in ancient Greece that all men did military service. So we can assume that. And also, based on the fact that he later wrote a play called The Persians, and it is a very real sort of account of war. And he does a very good job, apparently, of, and I say apparently because I'm not a soldier, but according to soldiers, I spoke to Peter Meineck about this, you guys can watch that video on this channel, that Aeschylus is actually unbelievable when it comes to writing war stories, writing about the realities of war. And so we can say with a lot of certainty due to assumption that he would have been fighting in these wars as well, because we do know that his brother actually died at the Battle of Marathon, so we can assume that he was there. We can assume that Aeschylus was at the Battle of Marathon during the Persian Wars. Unfortunately, Aeschylus is not a biographer though. He is a tragedian. And so therefore, because he's a tragedian, that word, I'm stumbling over that word, I'm really struggling, but because he's a guy that writes theatre and writes tragedy specifically, we have those accounts from him, and everything else that we know is sort of here, there, references, all of that sort of hearsay stuff when it comes to the ancient world and historical context. But with him, he wrote a number of plays. In fact, he's known as the father of tragedy because he's the earliest writer of tragedy that we have from ancient Greece. According to a lot of these fragments, Aeschylus could have written between 70 and 90 plays. Okay, that is absolutely insane. And before you're gonna ask, oh my God, that's so many plays to read, I'm never gonna get through all of Aeschylus, don't worry, we don't have all of them. It's a very unfortunate thing, we only have a very small handful of Aeschylus's plays. I will run through all of those for you in a hot second. But what's important to know is that actually the number itself, it might not actually be as crazy as you think. Nowadays, we have plays that are written as like a one-off and performed. You know, think Hamilton the musical, which is just one story and it's told throughout, you know, a 2-hour long play. And then you have, I'm trying to think of another play in the West End currently. Wicked, there we go. You know, you can go and watch Wicked and it's just one play, one and done. That's a very modern way of doing theatre. Because in the ancient world, theatre performances were actually done in groups of 4. So a playwright would write 3 tragedies, this is specifically about tragedy, They'd write 3 tragedies, and then there would be 1 satire play that would be performed at the end to like lighten the mood. So you'd make everybody cry and then make them laugh, and that would be like a good day at the theater, right? So when Aeschylus is writing plays, they are in groups of 4. So bear that in mind, that yes, it's a lot of plays, but it wasn't one and done. It was, here's a collection of plays. And actually, Aeschylus is the only playwright that we have a surviving trilogy of tragedies from, which is so incredibly special. It's the only time, even though, you know, publishers will publish a lot of plays, you know, all together, that we only have 1 trilogy that we know would have been performed in order, and that's the Oris Diet. So we know that all of these plays, these 3 plays, were performed one after the other. This is the only surviving trilogy that we have, and it's Aeschylus's. And so that is why people constantly scream about the Oris Diet. That's why we're like, read the Oris Diet! Because it is literally the only trilogy that survives. But what are the other plays of Aeschylus that survive today? So I've written them all down so that I wouldn't forget them and the dates, because there was no way I was going to remember all of these dates. But in order, we have the Persians, which I've already mentioned. And the Persians is kind of dated to around 472 BC. 7 Against Thebes is around 467 BC. Suppliance, or Suppliant Women, it's actually published with both titles. But that play, this exact date is totally unknown. And so really this is just a ballpark when it comes to 463 BC. We're not entirely certain about when that play was written or when it was performed. But the next then would be in order. It's going to be the Oris Diet, which then comes out after that, and that is around 458 BC. And lastly, we have Prometheus Bound, which comes out around 457 BC. But that date is actually completely unknown, and Prometheus Bound is a totally different can of worms, basically, because this actually divides a lot of classicists of whether Prometheus Bound is actually written by Aeschylus or not. Now, this is not something for this video, but I love debates like this because it goes into really technical, it's like shit that like most people don't need to know, but classicists are like, ooh, tell me more. It gets down to the language, the way the play is written, the rhythm of the play. There are lots of people that do not believe that Prometheus Bound is by Aeschylus, and we have just attributed it to him. But regardless, that's not for this video. Those are the plays by Aeschylus that we know of that survive to us, and lots of these are just one surviving play from a trilogy. Now, a question you might be having, or might not be, and I'm just going to feed it to you, so now you will be wondering this question, is, well, that's all great that Aeschylus has, you know, written all these plays, but how would people have seen them? What is the process of getting a play seen in the ancient world? And the way that Aeschylus did this is he moved his little booty to Athens and he submits them, like every other, you know, tragedy writer or play writer at the time. He submits them to a theater competition known as the Great Dionysia. Now, the Great Dionysia, we have a lot of these records of people who won, because after you would submit a play, it had to go through various people in order to be granted, you know, thumbs up that you can go and perform these plays for an audience of Athenians during this whole festival, which was in honor of the god Dionysus, who's the god of theater. That we know a lot of these you know, big theater playwrights would have submitted their stuff there. And so because of that, we have a lot of source material that would tell us who won in each year, which is really exciting. And so we know that a couple of Aeschylus's plays did win. We knew that he definitely was one of the more popular playwrights. And then this kind of changes when Sophocles comes into it. He loses a bunch of them to Sophocles. He loses, I think, 1 or 2 of them to Euripides. So it does sort of overlap, you know, a little bit. But anyways, going back to my paper to see which plays he won with, because again, I was not going to remember that. He won with the Persians. So when the Persians came out, he won that Great Dionysia trophy. He won first place. And he also won later on with the Oris Diet. Obviously, the Oris Diet won. The Oris Diet is amazing. And he also won with his Oedipus trilogy, which is where the 7 Against Thebes, that was the 3rd play in the installment, we think, was the 3rd play in the installment of an Oedipus trilogy. And that trilogy also won. Now, those are the only ones that we know for certain, because what we are also told from fragmental source material is that supposedly, Aeschylus won a total of 13 first place prizes at the Great Dionysia. Now that should already sound completely insane, but it's even more insane when you consider that the plays were performed in groups of 4. So 13 of Aeschylus's plays individually were not winning, that it was actually 13 groups of 4 of his plays supposedly won. And I say supposedly because, again, we don't know if this is for certain, but if that number is true, if that number is absolutely 100%, no one's fabricating that, no one's over-exaggerating that, if this is 150% that he won 13 first prizes, that is well over half of his plays that won at the Great Dionysia, which is insane. And Aeschylus is not only known for his great winnings at the Dionysia and for his great plays, but he's also known as a complete visionary when it comes to theatre, because before Aeschylus, theatre was so different. Like, we're talking prior to Aeschylus, theatre was just the chorus and one actor. It actually started off with just the chorus and then one actor was introduced. However, when Aeschylus comes onto the scene, he decides to add more characters to the scene so that they could talk to one another. And that had never been done before Aeschylus comes onto the scene. So this is a guy that really set up theatre to become what it is today. And he really set up tragedy. Like, he's really the guy that fathered that whole, genre of theatre and did it to absolute perfection. So those are all the really important things about Aeschylus that you just kind of need to know for context about the man himself. But I thought what would also be beneficial for this video is to also do very basic rundowns of the plays themselves. Now, obviously, I have done much longer episodes going into each and every play. However, because the plays, obviously, as you guys know, play runtime is like 2 hours, so the plays would take me 2 hours to get through, which means that summarizing them takes me about between 30 minutes to 50 minutes, all of them are sort of around that time period, which means that adding in context to those episodes is just not a thing. So I'm gonna do very basic summaries now, and then you guys can listen to these and then go watch the fuller episodes, or I'll probably clip these as well so they can be their own individual short episodes, which would just sort of come out on the channel as like, if you need context for this thing, here it is. Anywho, there's a lot of dilly-dallying in this episode. Let's just get to it. Let's start with the Persians. What is the Persians about and the context for the Persians? The Persians is set during the Persian War, as we can probably guess, except this play is not told from the side of the Greeks, it is told from the side of the Persians, which means that actually we follow the action in Susa, which is where the play is set, which is the capital of the Persian Empire. And this play is set right after the Persian disaster, obviously not the Greek disaster, but the Persian disaster at the Battle of Salamis, which is, I think, like the most important battle from the Persian Wars. That, Marathon, Plataea maybe is the other one. And I say maybe because I don't know the Battle of Plataea that well. But anyways, Salamis is one of those, like, monumental wins on the Greeks' side of things. So that is when this play is set, is right after this incredible battle that really, all of a sudden, the Persians are like, okay, we lost, that's it. That is literally the end of the game. And when word gets back to Susa, it is how the women are reacting to it and the people who remain in the capital of the Persian Empire. So that's what's going on there. 7 Against Thebes is the next play we're going to get into. And as I said when I was briefly explaining it earlier, that seems to be the third play in the Oedipus trilogy of tragedies. Now, the reason why I say that is because the 7 Against Thebes is after Oedipus has already fallen from grace. If you guys know the Oedipus story, this is the guy who was doomed to kill his father and marry his mother. Horrible mythology, but anywho. And this play is set after, Oedipus figures that out and he stabs his eyes out or kills himself or whatever it happens to be, because again, mythology changes. But either way, in 7 Against Thebes, it's actually now about Oedipus's children and also brothers, because he had the kids with his mother. Ugh. And they have decided that they are going to share rulership of Thebes. So they're going to switch out every year. But when this play is set, Eteocles, one of the brothers, refuses to give the throne back to Polynices. Polynices has not been residing in Thebes for the year that he is not king. So he has been out in sort of the Argolid, sort of running around. And when he comes back and the gates won't open and the throne will not be given back to him willingly, he decides to take it with force by gathering up a number of his mates, because they all have armies, and they all stand against one of the 7 gates of Thebes and they attack. And that is like a huge no-no for various reasons. That is then picked up by Sophocles as well. Sophocles has his own Oedipus trilogy, so you guys know. But as you may not remember, but I'm going to remind you, Eteocles and Polynices end up killing each other. And that is sort of the end of the play, because then all of the guys who then rallied up against Thebes as well, they are killed by the guards of Thebes. So again, tragedy at its finest. The Suppliants or Suppliant Women is a very interesting play, actually. That's a play that follows Egyptian-born but Greek heritage women. And it's a group of them who are going to be forcibly married off by their father, and they don't want to be. They don't want to go through these forced marriages. They don't want to have that kind of lifestyle. And so the play follows them as they basically are refugees, and they go to Argos to escape this this life that they were going to have by force, basically. And so the play is them trying to settle there and trying to figure out what their life is going to be based on this horrible tragedy of their situation. And spoiler alert, they are granted asylum in Argos. Again, much like Seven of Thebes, though, we don't have the surrounding plays around Suppliant Women or the Suppliants. So just bear that in mind, that this is one installment in the whole series. We then have the Oris Diet. So let's break down the Oris Diet very, very simply for you guys. The Oris Diet, as I've been saying, is a trilogy of plays. And the context for this is unbelievably important that you guys know, because it isn't really fleshed out in the plays. It's kind of assumed that the audience is going to know the backstory to when we pick up in the Agamemnon, which is the first play. It goes the Agamemnon, then it's the libation bearers, and then it is followed with the Eumenides. So the backstory to the Agamemnon is that when all of the fleets, the Greek fleets, are going to leave for Troy, because remember that during the Trojan War, Helen is picked up by Paris, whether willingly or unwillingly, not the point, but she is picked up and taken to Troy, and Menelaus tells his brother, Agamemnon rallies all of the Greeks, and they decide to go and fight for her, which they don't realize it's going to be 10 years, but it ends up being 10 years. Now, before they leave, when they're at the port of Aulis, and they're there are no winds to take the boats. And so a seer calls upon the gods, and he finds out that Artemis has been angered by Agamemnon. And because she's been angered by Agamemnon, he is being instructed to sacrifice virgin blood. And if he sacrifices virgin blood, then she will send favorable winds to the Greeks even, and they can then sail to Troy. But without this virgin blood, they will not be going anywhere. So Agamemnon reluctantly says okay, and unfortunately that means that he has to sacrifice his eldest daughter, because that is specifically who Artemis wants. So in the version that Aeschylus goes with, it's not every single version, but the version that Aeschylus goes with is that Agamemnon sacrifices Iphigenia, the winds pick up, and then they leave. And obviously Clytemnestra, who is his wife and the mother of Iphigenia, is absolutely distraught. She is raging, and she wants nothing more than to punish Agamemnon for his horrible, heinous crime. So between that instance and the Agamemnon is a full 10 years, okay? And in that time period, Clytemnestra in Mycenae has decided to shack up with Agamemnon's cousin Aegisthus, which is a move and a half on her part. But she decides she hates Agamemnon because he killed their child, and so she shacks up with his cousin, and they start plotting to kill Agamemnon in order, on Clytemnestra's end, to avenge her daughter, because how could he possibly have done this thing and get off scot-free? So when we get to the Agamemnon, now we get to the summary, when we get to the Agamemnon, Clytemnestra has spent 10 years building up all of this anger. Agamemnon shows up, and he shows up with a concubine called Cassandra, and when the two of them show up, Clytemnestra has them go into the palace, and she murders both of them in the tub because, again, Iphigenia. In these plays, Aegisthus does not play a role. In various other plays, he does play a role. But in this one specifically, he has no part. He just helped her plan things, and Clytemnestra really does that. So that is the Agamemnon. And then in play number 2, what we don't really hear about in play number 1 is the surrounding family outside of Clytemnestra and Iphigenia. But Clytemnestra and Agamemnon actually have 4 children, right? So actually the 4th kid isn't mentioned in Aeschylus, so I shouldn't be actually mentioning her. So according to Aeschylus, 3 kids are involved in this, and that is Iphigenia, who obviously was killed. We then have a daughter, Electra, who was actually present in the palace during the Agamemnon, but is not mentioned. And the last child is Orestes, but Orestes was sent away prior to Agamemnon coming home. He does not live in the palace. So in the second play, we hear that word has gotten back to Orestes, and when Orestes hears this, he is so mad. He cannot fathom how his mother would murder his father, the king, no less. How could she do this? According to divine law, if you are a son, you should always avenge your father. right? That is just like a thing. You avenge your family. It is pretty much an unwritten rule in Greek mythology. So Orestes, he wants to do this, but he also knows that killing his mother is a really massive thing. So prior to that play, we know that he has gone to the oracle at Delphi to go and ask what he should do. Should he let his mother live, which is technically what he should do. He should not be murdering his mother. But also, what is he going to do if he has to avenge his father? And we hear that Apollo had granted permission, Apollo, through his oracle, had granted permission for him to go and murder his mother, and that the gods would be on his side and that they would support him and that they would not punish him. So in this play, Orestes comes back to Mycenae. Him and Electra meet up by chance in the tomb of their father, and they plot to kill their mother for murdering their father. So that play pans out with Orestes then pretending to be a traveler, goes into the palace with his mate, and they kill, well, Orestes kills, not his mate, but Orestes kills Aegisthus and Clytemnestra. When that play comes to an end, the next play picks up pretty much off the last line, and we know that Orestes, because he has murdered his mother and because clearly Apollo didn't tell anybody that he had given permission for Orestes to do this, the Furies, who are the goddesses of vengeance, they come out in full force to make Orestes miserable. So they start tormenting him, and he cannot eat, he cannot sleep, he cannot live peacefully without hearing their screams in his head. No other character can hear them, by the way, it's just Orestes, and he is living his worst possible life, despite Apollo saying it was okay. So what this play does is this play goes into the trial, because the Furies, they think that they're doing the right thing. They decide that Orestes should never have killed his mother, he should never have even thought of it, so they are punishing justly. However, Orestes is like, well, Apollo was on my side. And so Apollo comes to defend Orestes, and we have this court scene where Apollo is defending Orestes, the Furies are on the other side, and they're sort of taking on the voice of, you know, the people who don't agree with Orestes killing his mother. And in the middle of them, we have Athena, because this trial takes place in Athens, so it's like right that she would come and she would be the one to mediate this whole thing. And there's a jury on stage, and all we watch is Orestes. He ends up being proven innocent. Athena decides that he was right to kill his mother, and so that's how that play pans out. And that is the end of the Oris Diet. So that is a summary of the Oris Diet. Very basically, all the context, all the basic action that you need to know. And lastly, we have Prometheus Bound. So Prometheus Bound is pretty much exactly what you would assume based on the name. It is Prometheus being bound to a rock. So Prometheus, for those of you guys that probably know his name, can't really think of what exactly he did. He's the guy that went up to Olympus and he took fire from the gods and he brought it down to the mortals. And obviously that was a big no-no. So this play sees him pinned to a rock, and he has like lots of conversations with people, basically. He has lots of conversations about what he did, about why he did it. And also he has a secret. Prometheus has a secret that he knows what is basically going to be the downfall of Zeus. And he knows what is going to be, I'm trying to think of a way of phrasing this, but what is going to be that sort of dent in his armor, right? So he knows this, he won't tell anybody, and so because of that, at the end of the play, he gets sentenced to the underworld for more torturing because he will not let this secret go. And those are all the plays of Aeschylus that we have that survive, summarized in time. I cannot believe that I've done this under 30 minutes, but those are the plays. Now that's all I want to include in this episode. So if you guys are watching this and you know a fun fact about Aeschylus, or you know a fun fact about any of these plays that I did not include in this summary episode, in this context episode, please leave them in the comments below. I love it when you guys add facts, or I love it when you guys, you know, add fun things in, or maybe, I mean, in my Homer episodes, lots of people have just been saying, you know, things that they have experienced whilst reading Homer, things that they wish they knew before reading Homer. So, you know, do that as well with Aeschylus, that if there's anything when you guys were reading Aeschylus's plays that you were like, oh, I wish I had known that, just add it in the comments below. You know, let this be a little community, let people come here and not only hear me talk, but also hear firsthand experiences from all of you guys, and chit chat down there. But that's all I have to say about Aeschylus. So thank you guys so much for tuning into this video. Thank you guys so much for subscribing, for liking this video, for tuning into the channel. I massively, massively appreciate it. So we'll be seeing you next time with more videos here on Moan Inc. So I'll see you guys then.